At my 67th birthday party, my daughter's boyfriend pulled me into my study, closed the door, and said, "Marcus, Sarah's going to invest in my next property flip. I need you to co-sign a $200,000 loan, or I'm walking away from her. You've got 48 hours to decide." He smiled like we were old friends making a business deal. I smiled back and said I'd think about it. But what Brandon Pierce didn't know was that I'd been a pharmacist for 40 years in Toronto, and I'd spent my entire career identifying poison. I knew exactly what he was the moment I met him. Let me back up 3 months. It was late September, and the leaves in my Etobicoke neighborhood were just starting to turn that brilliant mix of orange and gold that makes Toronto autumns so beautiful. I was in my backyard, raking leaves, when Sarah called. My daughter has always been the logical one, the careful one. She got her computer science degree from Waterloo, landed a job at a tech company downtown, and worked her way up to senior software engineer. At 29, she owned her own condo in Liberty Village and had her life together in a way that made me proud every single day. "Dad, I'm seeing someone," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "His name is Brandon. We've been dating for about 6 weeks, and I really like him. I want you to meet him." 6 weeks. My late wife Catherine would have said that was too soon to be serious, but I bit my tongue. Sarah was an adult. She could make her own choices. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, leaning my rake against the maple tree. "Bring him by for dinner this weekend." When Brandon showed up that Saturday evening, my first impression was that he looked the part. 32 years old, tall, fit, wearing an expensive-looking sports jacket and designer jeans. He drove a BMW 5 Series that he'd parked right in front of my house where everyone could see it. He brought a bottle of wine, shook my hand firmly, and called me sir with just the right amount of respect. But I'd learned something in 4 decades of pharmacy work. The most dangerous medications often come in the prettiest packaging. We sat down to dinner, the pot roast I'd been making since Sarah was a child, and Brandon dominated the conversation. He talked about his real estate investment company, about the properties he was flipping in Hamilton and Mississauga, about the amazing opportunities in the Ontario housing market. He name-dropped neighborhoods and developments, threw around terms like cap rate and equity position, and made everything sound impressive and just vague enough that you couldn't pin down any specifics. Sarah watched him with stars in her eyes. My daughter, who could debug the most complex code, who could spot a logic error in seconds, was completely blind to the inconsistencies in his story. "So Brandon," I said, cutting my roast beef, "what company do you work with? I'd love to look up some of your projects online." He didn't miss a beat. "I operate through several LLCs, Marcus. Keeps things clean for tax purposes. Different properties, under different entities. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, actually, but I nodded. "And how long have you been in real estate?" I asked. "About 5 years now," he said. "Started right after university. Best decision I ever made." "Which university?" I asked. "Ryerson," he said quickly. "Business program." Sarah jumped in then, changing the subject to talk about their plans to go to Niagara-on-the-Lake the following weekend. Brandon put his hand over hers on the table, and she beamed at him. After dinner, as Sarah helped me clear the dishes in the kitchen, she whispered, "What do you think of him?" I wanted to say that something felt off, that his stories were too smooth, that men who were genuinely successful didn't need to talk about it so much. But I looked at my daughter's hopeful face and said, "He seems nice, sweetheart. Just take your time, okay?" "I know it's fast, Dad," she said, "but it feels right. He really listens to me. He supports my career. He's not intimidated by the fact that I make good money." That last part made my stomach turn. I wondered how much Sarah had told him about her salary, her savings, her recent promotion that came with a substantial raise. Over the next month, Brandon became a constant presence in Sarah's life. He moved into her condo after just 8 weeks of dating. When I expressed concern about the speed, Sarah said, "Dad, his lease was up, and he was between properties." It made sense financially. I bit my tongue again, but I didn't stop paying attention. Brandon always had expensive taste, but never seemed to actually pay for anything. When they went out to dinner, Sarah picked up the check. When they went to Blue Mountain for a weekend ski trip, Sarah's credit card covered the hotel. Brandon would always say something about having his money tied up in investments or waiting for a property sale to close. The expensive car? I looked up the model online. It was a lease, and an aggressive one at that. The designer clothes? I recognized discount outlet brands when I saw them, despite the fancy labels. The watch he wore? I had a friend who sold jewelry, and he confirmed it was a convincing fake when I described it. Everything about Brandon Pierce was a carefully constructed image, and he was using my daughter to fund it. But I needed proof. I needed something concrete that would make Sarah see the truth. That's when I called my old friend, Detective James Chen. We'd gone to university together, played hockey on the same recreational league for 20 years, and stayed close even after he retired from the Toronto Police Service. James knew how to find information, and more importantly, he knew how to do it legally. I need you to run a background check, I told him over coffee at our usual Tim Hortons. My daughter's boyfriend. Something's off about him. James pulled out a small notebook. Give me everything you know. I gave him Brandon's full name, approximate age, the fact that he claimed to have gone to Ryerson, and the license plate number from the BMW. James nodded, made notes, and said he'd see what he could find. 3 days later, he called me. Marcus, you need to sit down for this. Brandon Pierce had 3 separate limited liability companies registered in Ontario. 2 of them had filed for bankruptcy in the past 6 years. The first bankruptcy, in 2018, listed $340,000 in debts. The second, in 2021, listed $180,000. Both bankruptcies cited failed real estate investments and left a trail of angry creditors. But that wasn't all. James had found court records showing that Brandon was currently being sued by a former business partner for $75,000. The lawsuit alleged fraud, misrepresentation, and breach of contract. The case was ongoing. There's more, James said. I found a woman named Jennifer Morrison. She dated Brandon 2 years ago. I tracked her down on social media and gave her a call. She was willing to talk. Jennifer's story made my blood run cold. She'd met Brandon on a dating app. He'd swept her off her feet, moved in with her after 2 months, and immediately started pitching investment opportunities. He'd convinced her to let him use her credit cards for business expenses that he promised to pay back. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd racked up $22,000 in charges and disappeared. She'd spent the last year paying off the debt and trying to rebuild her credit. She said he has a pattern, James told me. He targets successful women, usually in their late 20s or early 30s. He moves fast, love bombs them, gets access to their money, and then either gets caught or moves on when he's bled them dry. I felt sick, but I also felt a cold, focused anger settling into my bones. This man was not going to do to my daughter what he'd done to Jennifer Morrison. I need everything documented, I told James. Court records, bankruptcy filings, credit reports, if we can get them legally, everything. What are you going to do? James asked. I'm going to wait, I said. He's going to make his move soon, and when he does, I'll be ready. I didn't have to wait long. 2 weeks later, Brandon came to my birthday party. I hadn't wanted a big celebration, just family. My brother David drove in from Ottawa with his wife. My 2 nieces came from Mississauga. Sarah's best friend Amy was there. And of course, Sarah brought Brandon. We'd just finished singing Happy Birthday and cutting the cake when Brandon asked if he could speak to me privately. I saw Sarah give him an encouraging smile, and my heart sank. She thought he was going to ask for my blessing to propose. I could see it in her eyes. We went into my study, the same room where I used to help Sarah with her homework, where Catherine and I used to pay bills and plan our retirement. Brandon closed the door and sat down in the leather chair across from my desk, like he owned the place. Marcus, he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, I want to talk to you man to man. I love your daughter. I want to build a future with her. I said nothing. I just waited. I've found an incredible investment opportunity, he continued, a pre-construction condo development in Oakville. The developer is offering early investor pricing, but we need to move fast. Sarah wants to invest her savings, and I'm putting in everything I have. but we're short about $200,000 for the down payment. There it was. The ask. I need you to co-sign a loan, he said, just as a formality. The investment will pay for itself within 6 months when we flip our units. You won't have to pay a penny. But Sarah told me you've got equity in this house, and the bank will approve the loan if you're on the paperwork. He smiled, that same confident smile he'd given me a dozen times before. You've got 48 hours to decide, he said, because if we don't move on this deal, I'm going to have to walk away. And honestly, Marcus, I don't know if I can stay with Sarah if she's not willing to take this opportunity with me. I need a partner who's ready to build wealth, not someone who's afraid to take risks. He was threatening to leave my daughter if I didn't sign over $200,000. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I smiled. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. Of course, Brandon said, standing up and shaking my hand. I understand completely. Just remember, this opportunity won't last. We went back out to the party. I ate cake, opened presents, and chatted with my family. The whole time, I watched Brandon charm everyone in the room. He had his arm around Sarah's waist. He laughed at my brother's jokes. He complimented my nieces. He was performing, and he was good at it. But I'd made my decision. That night, after everyone had gone home, I called James. He made his move, I told him. $200,000. Co-signed loan. 48 hours. What do you need? James asked. Everything you found. Printed, documented, ready to present. I'm going to need it in 2 weeks. Why 2 weeks? James asked. Because Sarah's promotion party is in 2 weeks, I said. Her company is celebrating her new role as senior engineering manager. She's hosting a dinner party at her condo. Family and close friends. Brandon will be there. You're going to expose him publicly, James said. I'm going to protect my daughter, I corrected him. And I'm going to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. The next morning, I called Sarah. About Brandon's investment opportunity, I said. I'd like to see the paperwork before I make a decision. Really? Sarah sounded thrilled. Dad, I knew you'd come around. Brandon's going to be so happy. I just want to do my due diligence, I said. It's a lot of money. I'm sure Brandon understands. Brandon sent over a slick PDF that evening. It had all the right buzzwords. Pre-construction, early investor advantage, projected ROI of 200%. But there were no specific addresses, no developer names, no actual legal documentation. It was a fantasy wrapped in professional formatting. I forwarded it to James, who forwarded it to a real estate lawyer friend. The lawyer confirmed what I suspected. This was not a legitimate investment opportunity. At best, it was a poorly conceived flip strategy that would lose money. At worst, it was a complete fabrication. Meanwhile, James had been busy. He'd obtained copies of the bankruptcy filings, the lawsuit documents, and the court records. He'd gotten a statement from Jennifer Morrison, willing to testify to Brandon's pattern of financial abuse. And through some contacts he had at a credit reporting agency, he'd legally obtained Brandon's credit report, which showed $89,000 in outstanding debt across 7 credit cards. But James found something else, something I hadn't expected. Marcus, he said when he called me 3 days before Sarah's party. Brandon's married. What? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. He's still legally married to a woman named Michelle Tremblay. They got married in Montreal 4 years ago. Never divorced. She filed for separation 2 years ago after he disappeared with $30,000 from their joint account. But the divorce was never finalized. Does Sarah know? I asked. I doubt it, James said. Michelle lives in Quebec. She has a restraining order against him. A restraining order. My daughter was living with a man who had a restraining order against him from his wife. I spent the next 3 days preparing. James helped me compile everything into a folder. Printed documents, highlighted sections, a timeline of Brandon's financial crimes and romantic cons. We organized it like a trial presentation, because in a way, that's exactly what it was. I also did something else. I hired a private investigator to follow Brandon for 1 week. I needed to know if he was still in contact with other women, if he was already lining up his next target. The investigator's report came back 2 days before the party. Brandon had met with a woman named Jessica Chen 3 times that week at various cafes in downtown Toronto. The investigator had photographed them together, laughing, holding hands across the table. He'd even captured a kiss goodbye outside Union Station. I had everything I needed. Sarah's promotion dinner was scheduled for Saturday evening at 7. She'd invited 12 people: me, my brother David and his wife, her best friend Amy, 2 colleagues from work, Brandon's supposed business partner, who I suspected didn't exist, and a few other friends. I arrived at 6:30, carrying a gift bag with a nice bottle of wine and a card congratulating Sarah on her promotion. I also carried a leather portfolio folder, the kind lawyers use, which I set down by the door. Brandon greeted me with a firm handshake and that same confident smile. "Marcus, good to see you. Have you had a chance to think about our investment opportunity?" "I have," I said. "I'd like to discuss it later tonight, if that's all right." "Absolutely," Brandon said. "I think you're going to love what we've put together." Dinner was beautiful. Sarah had catered from a nice Italian restaurant, and everyone was in good spirits. The conversation flowed, wine glasses were filled and refilled, and Sarah glowed with happiness as people congratulated her on her promotion. After dessert, Brandon stood up and tapped his wine glass with a fork. "Everyone, if I could have your attention," he said. "I want to make a toast to Sarah, but I also want to share some exciting news." Sarah looked up at him, surprised and delighted. "Sarah and I have been talking about our future," Brandon continued, "and we've found an incredible investment opportunity that's going to change our lives. A pre-construction development in Oakville that's going to double our money in just 6 months." He paused for effect. "We're investing Sarah's savings, and I'm putting in everything I have, and with Marcus's help co-signing a small loan, we're going to be set for life. This is the beginning of building real wealth together." He raised his glass. "To Sarah, to us, and to our future." Everyone started to raise their glasses, but I stood up. "Actually, Brandon," I said quietly, "before we toast, I'd like to say something." Sarah looked at me, confused. Brandon's smile faltered slightly, but he nodded. "Of course, Marcus. The floor is yours." I walked over to where I'd left my portfolio folder and brought it to the table. Everyone was watching now, sensing that something was different about this moment. "Sarah, sweetheart," I said, "you know I love you more than anything in this world, and because I love you, I need to show you something." I opened the folder. "Brandon, you asked me to co-sign a $200,000 loan, so I did what any responsible person would do. I did my due diligence. I researched your background." Brandon's face went pale. "Marcus, this isn't the time." "I think it's exactly the time," I said. I pulled out the first document. "This is a bankruptcy filing from 2018. Your company, Pierce Development LLC, filed for bankruptcy with $340,000 in debt." I placed it on the table. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. "This is another bankruptcy filing from 2021. Pierce Properties Incorporated, $180,000 in debt." Another document on the table. "This is an active lawsuit from your former business partner, claiming you defrauded him of $75,000. Brandon stood up. "You had no right to investigate me. This is a violation of my privacy." "It's public record," I said calmly. "Anyone can access it. But here's what's not public." I pulled out Jennifer Morrison's statement. "This is a statement from a woman named Jennifer Morrison. She dated you 2 years ago. You moved in with her after 2 months, used her credit cards to rack up $22,000 in charges, and then disappeared. Does that sound familiar?" Sarah was crying now. Amy put her arm around her. "And this," I said, pulling out the marriage certificate, "is your marriage license. You married Michelle Tremblay 4 years ago in Montreal. You're still legally married to her. The divorce was never finalized." The room was dead silent. "Sarah," I said gently, "he's still married. You're living with a married man who's been running the same con on you that he's run on at least 2 other women." Brandon's face was red. "This is insane! Sarah, your father is trying to control you. He can't stand to see you happy." "Is it true?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Brandon, is any of this true?" "It's taken out of context," Brandon said. "Those bankruptcies were business risks. The lawsuit is frivolous. Jennifer Morrison is a crazy ex who— What about Michelle? Sarah asked. Are you married? Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. Answer her, I said. We're separated, he finally said. It's just paperwork. We haven't been together in years. But you're still married, Sarah said. You told me you'd never been married. I pulled out the final documents. The credit report showing $89,000 in debt, and the photographs from the private investigator showing Brandon with Jessica Chen. These were taken this week, I said. While you were at work, planning this dinner party, celebrating your promotion, Brandon was with another woman. Sarah looked at the photographs. Then she looked at Brandon. Get out, she said quietly. Sarah, please. Get out of my home, she screamed. Right now. Brandon looked around the room. Every face was staring at him with disgust. My brother David stood up, all 6'3" of him, and took a step toward Brandon. You heard her, David said. Brandon grabbed his jacket and his keys and left without another word. We heard the BMW start up and drive away. Sarah collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Amy held her while I stood there, holding the folder of evidence, feeling the weight of what I'd just done. I'm sorry, sweetheart, I said. I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. Sarah looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. How long have you known? A few weeks, I admitted. I needed to be sure. I needed to have proof that you couldn't deny. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I would have defended him if you'd just told me. I wouldn't have believed you without proof. I know, I said. The party ended quietly after that. Everyone hugged Sarah and left, offering support and promising to check in. Amy stayed the night, sleeping on Sarah's couch to make sure she wasn't alone. I drove home through the dark Toronto streets, past the CN Tower, lit up against the night sky, past all the familiar landmarks of a city I'd called home for 40 years. I felt tired and sad and relieved all at once. The next morning, Sarah called me. Dad, she said, I checked my credit card statements from the past 2 months. Brandon charged over $8,000 that I didn't know about. He must have taken my card from my purse when I was sleeping. We're reporting it to the police, I said. James has all the documentation ready. I feel so stupid, Sarah said. How did I not see it? You're not stupid, I told her. You're trusting and kind, and you wanted to believe the best in someone. That's not a character flaw, sweetheart. That's what makes you beautiful. Brandon is a professional con artist. This is what he does. It's not your fault. How did you know? She asked. What made you suspicious? I thought about it for a moment. I spent 40 years as a pharmacist, Sarah. People would come in with prescriptions, and I had to learn to spot the fake ones. The ones who were doctor shopping, who were trying to scam the system. And the thing about scammers is that they always try too hard. Their stories are too perfect, too smooth. They overwhelm you with details to distract you from the gaps in logic. I paused. Brandon talked too much about his success and never showed any actual results. He had expensive things but never paid for anything. He moved too fast because he needed to hook you before you had time to think. I recognized the pattern because I'd seen it 1,000 times in my career, just in a different context. Thank you for protecting me, Sarah said. I know it couldn't have been easy. You're my daughter, I said simply. There's nothing I wouldn't do to keep you safe. We filed a police report that afternoon. The credit card fraud, combined with the evidence James had gathered and the statements from Jennifer Morrison and Michelle Tremblay, were enough for the Toronto Police Service to open an investigation into Brandon Pierce's activities. 3 weeks later, Brandon was arrested and charged with credit card fraud, identity fraud, and breach of a restraining order. The Crown Prosecutor's Office was also looking into potential fraud charges related to his fake investment schemes. Sarah threw herself into therapy, working through the betrayal and the manipulation she'd experienced. She changed her locks, changed her passwords, and started rebuilding her sense of trust. One evening, about a month after the dinner party, she came over to my house for our usual Sunday pot roast. We sat at the same dining room table where she'd first introduced me to Brandon, where I'd watched him weave his lies and charm my family. I've been thinking, Sarah said, cutting her roast beef, about what you said, about how pharmacists learn to spot fake prescriptions. What about it? I asked. You spent your whole career protecting people from poison, even when they didn't know they were in danger, she said. You didn't just fill prescriptions. You watched for interactions, for abuse, for anything that could hurt someone. You were always protecting people. She put down her fork and looked at me. You were doing the same thing for me. You saw the poison, and you stopped me from taking it. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That's what fathers do, sweetheart. We protect our children, even when they're grown, especially when they're grown. I'm going to be more careful now, she said. I'm taking a break from dating. I need time to figure out what I want, what red flags look like, how to trust my own judgment again. That's wise, I said. And when you're ready, the right person will come along. Someone who doesn't rush you, who doesn't need anything from you except your company. Someone who adds to your life instead of taking from it. How will I know? She asked. I thought about Catherine, about how we'd met at a pharmacy conference 35 years ago, how we'd dated for 2 years before getting engaged, how she'd never asked me for anything except my time and my honesty. You'll know because they won't make you feel like you need to prove anything, I said. They won't create urgency or pressure. They'll be patient, because they'll know that anything worth having is worth waiting for. Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks, a real smile that reached her eyes. Kind of like how real medicine takes time to work, she said. You can't rush healing. Exactly, I said. Real medicine takes time. Real love does too. She stayed for dessert, and we watched the hockey game together. The Maple Leafs playing the Canadiens, the same teams we'd watched together since she was a little girl. The house felt warm and safe, filled with the comfortable silence of family. As I watched my daughter curl up on the couch with a cup of tea, safe and healing and home, I thought about Brandon Pierce sitting in a jail cell, probably already planning his next scam, his next victim. And I thought about all the fathers out there who might not recognize the signs, who might not know how to protect their children from predators like him. I couldn't save everyone, but I'd saved my daughter. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything.